Hello, and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened, where we discuss, explore, and connect with fellow empaths, healers, intuitives, and seekers.
Welcome back to another Share Your Light episode. And as always, one of the reasons I love to do this is to showcase people who are doing amazing things and shining their light and raising the vibration. And today's episode is a little bit different because our guest is Dave Droxler. And Dave is a very accomplished actor. He's a voiceover. He's a screenplay writer. He's a screenwriter. He does, just an amazing, amazing, amazing bio. But the reason I asked Dave to come on today is because he is highly empathic, he is incredibly connected, and he also has used his own personal story and brought that into a form of art that can help so many other people. And I think that's the goal of what we're all trying to do right now is what can I personally bring to the table to help raise the vibration and make a difference? So I would like to share some of Dave's accolades because it'll give you more of a feeling of who he really is. And Dave had off-Broadway premiere of his one-man show, Robin and Me, My Little Spark of Madness, with Abingdon Theatre Company. This won 5 Broadway World Awards, including Best Actor and Best Play. Dave's other play, Walken On Sunshine, premiered at FringeNYC, winning the TheaterMania Audience Favorite Award and Outstanding Excellence in Acting for Dave's performance. His most recent play, Beyond, received a staged reading with New Feathers Productions in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Select New York acting credits include Candide, directed by Hal Prince of the New York City Opera. The Drama Desk nominated production, The Man Who Laughs, with the Stolen Chair Theater. Sweetie, directed by Pat Burt at the Signature Theater. The New York Times critics pick Honky at Urban Stages. And his first one-man show he wrote and performed, Character, which was the Prospect Theater Dark Knight series. Dave voices characters for Nick Jr.'s Emmy-nominated show, Santiago of the Seas, Sesame's Emmy-nominated show, Mecha Builders on HBO Max, Sesame's Bees Block, Nickelodeon's Monster High, and Sunny Day, PBS, Alma's Way, Apple TV's Get Rolling with Otis, Noggin, and Dodo Kids. Other TV film credits include FBI Most Wanted, How to Get Away with Murder, What Would You Do, and Limitless. So welcome, Dave, and thank you for your patience as I stumbled through your bio, but I just think it's so important that people really get a feel for who you are and what you're bringing to the table.
Thanks. I sometimes stumble through it too because I'm like, what do I put in and what do I not and what's too much and does anybody really care?
Yeah, but I'm just going to jump right to it. Is the
Yeah.
reason that I really love this is that your one, Robin and Me, your show, you used your own personal experiences and then you basically channel Robin Williams, which we have a lot of sensitives, a lot of intuitives, a lot of people. Could you talk about how you blended your story, your art, and your connection with spirit to bring the show together?
Yeah, sure. So, I always wanted to do something related to Robin Williams, especially after he passed. I had tons of people asking me when you're going to do it because I would always do my Robin Williams impression. And once I found the story and realized that I wanted to tell my story versus his story because I didn't feel like that was my story to tell, quite literally, all of a sudden the pieces came together. And I realized like, oh, the story that I need to tell is about how much he affected me throughout my life and realizing the why to that, because obviously there is the aspect of just being inspired by him as an artist, as many people are in the world. And but there was also the personal aspect of the relationship with my father and seeing how there were times throughout my life that his movies or appearances he'd have on late shows, just multiple aspects of his existence drew me in. I felt like I could relate to him in a sense because there was a lot of his quirkiness, his personality, his demeanor that I saw myself in. And because of that, since I felt like there was a bit of a disconnect between my father and that I felt like he was kind of filling in the void. And When my grandfather passed away when I was 8 years old, he was the closest thing I ever felt like being like, oh, I belong in this family, because he was a clown, he was a performer, and so I felt this immediate like draw, like, oh, okay, I wasn't adopted. There was at least somebody here, you know. And so when he passed away, there was this element of feeling a little lost, and I think I became even more drawn towards Robin Williams during that time because he felt like an uncle, a family member in a way, and seeing somebody who was like, oh, that energy that I had as a child, that kind of manic energy and wanting to do voices and stuff, I was like, oh, there's somebody who's an adult who's doing it and is being respected for and cared for about it. So once I saw all of those parallels of different points throughout my life where a Robin Williams movie came out, like Mrs. Doubtfire, during a crucial time when I thought my parents were going to get a divorce and there was a lot of tension in the house. And when Patch Adams came out during a time when literally, I think like 5 or 6 weeks before it came out, this little girl that I knew passed away of cancer, and it helped me mourn, which I was not able to figure out how to do because I didn't have my father to explain how to do it because he didn't know how to do it. And as I was continuing to find all those stories and mold the kind of universal aspect of it, it's when I started to realize that, well, there is this section of the story that I talk about when, particularly in my 20s, because I'm a mimic and I would do impressions and stuff. I was immediately drawn to doing a Robin Williams impression, finding that tonality that like, okay, yes, oh my gosh, this is fantastic, I love you, oh, what a beautiful mic, oh, if you can only see me now, baby, yeah. Once I started to find that, the thing that started to take over was that there's a certain physicality that comes into it, both like in your throat and in your body and in his stance. He would always have his hands like kind of in front of his crotch, you know, kind of the way he would do that stance. And I found this kind of almost, I don't know, permission to be funny and to improv and to go off on tangents, that people almost accepted it. And so when I was experimenting with my own artistic, you know, capabilities as an improviser and a clown, if you will, I found that tendency was to naturally kind of break into him. And sometimes I would go like full like 10 and be doing an impression of him, quote unquote. And other times I wouldn't even realize it. And I'd have many people come up to me as I was doing my improvisational stuff for different jobs. Oh, you remind me so much of Robin Williams. And I'd be like, oh, thanks. And, you know, I look nothing like Robin Williams by any means. But there was the realization, I was like, oh, the persona and that level of comfort, if you will, for an audience to want to go along the ride with you and to allow you to play, which then gives you the comfort to want to experiment and just like, you know, just see whatever just comes out of your brain. And I have found that as I've gotten older and I've done it more, and particularly with working on the show and not just doing it like little tidbits here and there, that there was this aspect there you start to realize, you're like, oh, I feel like I might be almost like channeling him in some way, like not fully in the sense of like, you know, Whoopi Gold from Ghost, you know, like,
Right.
why'd you dye your hair, you know, that thing, but definitely where it's almost like an almost like an out of body experience. Like I still feel in control, but there is this level of when you're in the zone, as like artists call it, you know, you're just in the flow, you're in the zone, and you found like you're not even thinking about it, you're in it with the audience, and it's that moment that all actors and performers want, you know, when, especially in a live performance, you're like, oh, we're all in this together. That it started to flow out of me, like particularly when I would like improv as Robin, where I almost felt like I was just taking a back seat in a sense and kind of almost filtering it too, because like, you know, because there were times I'd be like, I feel like all these jokes like coming out of my brain so quickly, and then needing to decide which ones are coming out and which ones like, oh yeah, that might have worked in the 80s, but you know, now we're in cancel culture, so let's not do that, you know. Like, let's be the filter now. And it became interesting because I found that when I would be doing the shows during the off-Broadway run that I had last year through Abingdon Theatre Company, that if I did not allow myself to have the headspace a half an hour, 45 minutes beforehand, my performance would be off. And I would just be too in my head. I couldn't think of the lines. I felt like my improv was not there. I felt like I wasn't as sharp. And, aside from it just being like a technical aspect as an actor, I found that I needed to connect with not only, Robin, but like with my grandfather and with the young girl Carly who passed away, like all these people I told these stories about, and kind of just be in a headspace beforehand. Because I learned the hard way. I had my sister, she was like texting me literally up to as I was like standing at the curtain, we're just about, I don't even remember, who knows about anything. And I was, responding back and then putting it down. And I went out and I was just a mess the entire time. And I realized like, oh, I need that headspace. And so I would take the time to half an hour beforehand, just be in the room and just start putting on the voice by myself and starting to feel that tightness. And it's almost like this like sensation in your chest where you're both like scared and excited. And it's almost like tingling down your fingers. And it was one of those things I was like, oh, okay, I need to get into this space. I need to get that thing where I can hear the audience coming in and sitting and all the hubbub of them talking, so that when I'm coming up to that curtain, I need to be nervous. I need to have this element of like nervous and excitement, not feeling like, okay, I got this in the bag. Because it's like that edge is the thing where I feel like I'm like, oh, this feels like that Robin energy where it's like just like slightly manic and it's on edge, but I'm still me. And I always have this little line that I say to myself, which is like, oh, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't worry. Because that was something he would always say, don't be afraid, my friend, okay? And I would say it to myself, like, oh, no, don't be afraid, come on, you've got this. Yeah, let's do this, baby, yeah. And just kind of like hype myself up. And I found that it really helped a lot. So once I was out there, it was like, boom, okay, we're doing this now.
What I love, love, love about this, Dave, is that you're describing what it feels like for a medium to invite someone in spirit to come close enough and blend with your energy that you can feel their physicality. You might get their mannerisms. You might suddenly start, talking with more of an accent because you've allowed their energetic field to blend with yours. And you're doing the same thing. And the way you describe it of that anxiousness, that feeling of, I need it. And I always say, Denise, get the hell out of the way and let it come through you, not from you.
Yes.
And it sounds like you're doing the same exact thing as far
Yeah.
as you're allowing that. And you're right. No one can see you because this is just audio. You don't physically resemble Robin Williams, but when you do the voice, it's almost a transfiguration of I can see his features come through on yours. It's cool as hell.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, it's. I mean, that's the thing. It's so interesting because when they talk with like actors, they always say like, oh, do you work from the outside in or the inside out? Meaning like, do you go into a part like really getting into your head and finding the meaning and the depth and the anger and the sadness or the whatever, or do you go from the outside where you find like the shoes and the way you stand and this and that helps you find it, and everybody has their own way of doing it. There's no right or wrong. And for me personally, I'll switch back and forth depending on the part. And so the thing that I have found with doing this particular show, since I'm up on stage for 75 minutes straight, and I'm not only playing Robin Williams and myself, but I'm playing my dad, I'm playing my mom, I'm playing, at one point I'm playing Jim Carrey and Jack Nicholson and Eddie Izzard, and I'm playing all these different parts, and I'm switching back and forth. Like I'm both talking to the audience as a narrator. I'm having scenes with myself as Robin Williams. I'm having scenes with my entire family, so I'm bouncing back and forth. And so I found that working from the outside helped me find the inside for this one because I needed that sharp specificity of bouncing back and forth, and working with the director, Chad, to really find that and make it sharp. And as I was doing that, I found that it became such this flow pattern where I was no longer thinking about the physicality. The physicality was like, oh yes, it's like juggling, it's like riding a bike. Your body just remembers naturally how to do it. But then because of that, then everything else was flowing through that I would constantly get feedback from people who saw the show that they're like, I would forget that I was watching one person doing a scene, and then by the end you're like, oh, that was just one person that whole time doing that. And I don't say that with any ego by any means. Like it's one of those things where you're like, yeah, I was kind of feeling that too, where I was feeling like because you have to switch back and forth, and sometimes you're playing the antagonist and the protagonist in the same exact scene, and so to switch that mindset on a snap, it's this thing where all of a sudden it kind of takes over, and so then it becomes where like I not only feel like I'm like channeling Robin, but I'm channeling my grandfather. Now soon I'll be channeling my father who just passed, and so it's kind of this remarkable sensation to feel and to understand it now, because when I was in college, I had this one specific moment that I would always tell my friends about. That I was doing this production of a show called The Normal Heart, which takes place in the 80s during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And I play a character who finds out he has AIDS, and you see his progression of getting sicker and sicker with his partner. And there's this one scene in particular where I had to, like, right out of the gate, lights up at the beginning of the scene, having not been on the stage for a while, having to go right into just being emotional mess, like crying, bawling, sick and everything. And I'm getting into this like huge fight with my partner, and he's throwing food at me, and I'm sick. And, it's this beautiful, sad scene of seeing how this disease affected people's relationship. And I always recognized that I would get this moment when I was lying on the floor, crying and bawling, that I would have this out of body. Like I felt like I was watching myself and then watching the audience. And then in addition to that, the thing that helped me get to that emotional place wasn't because I had any connection in the sense of like I did not have AIDS, I'm not gay, and I was also 18, so I didn't have enough life experience. But the thing that would get me there emotionally, and I find that I continue to do this, was that I was almost feeling what the audience was feeling. Like I felt like I was the audience watching the scene, which was then making me get more emotional and cry and get to that place, because I'm feeling like, oh, I'm showing you what I want to see as the audience member and what I'm thinking you're seeing and feeling. And so it was always this weird thing where I was always afraid to tell people about it, because I was like, I don't know, this feels kind of weird. I don't quite, like I every time I remember this, I'm seeing it from like above and like off to the angle, like I can see it. And now as I've gotten older and have done this several times, and that I'm like, oh, I think that's what I'm doing. And I think that's also what a lot of great performers do, is they get to that moment and they call it when they're like, I'm in the zone. And I'm like, oh, I think that because, many artists are empathic, if I'm saying it correctly, that they're just kind of channeling something else, something higher, something deeper that's just kind of taken over, and that's what's making the audience connect to the performers, and then making their performance even more enhanced in a way. So it's just been a very fascinating experience to go through it, but then also figure out how to manage it and work with it and go with it versus getting away from you in a positive or a negative way, in any way.
So, see, I love that, because I think we all come with something that helps bring us together in humanity and raise the vibration. And this feels like what you do. You bring people together emotionally through your art, through your creativity, through your storyline. This is kind of a weird question, but it feels like as you've done this and as it's progressed, it's not only helped you to heal and come to terms with some stuff, but also to send healing back to your family, or I know you're a dad and you have children. Do you feel like there has been a residual impact of healing throughout your lineage because of the work you've been doing with this play?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I have found that it has obviously helped me a lot, both with understanding my father and understanding myself as a father with my children. That's the core of it. Like, yes, it's called Robin and Me, My Little Spark of Madness, and it's, about Robin Williams, about how he's inspired and stuff. But at the end of the day, he's kind of like the Jiminy Cricket, the sidekick of the story. He's kind of the catalyst to get us into the core of the story, which is the relationship between a parent and their child. And this particular one, it focuses on my relationship with my dad. And a lot of it is that thing that you always hear, which is that you become your parent, and and that's such like a trite thing to say, but it's trite because it's true, it's because you start to recognize through therapy, through your own experiences, these moments of you're like, oh, I'm acting the way that my dad used to act, but the difference being that I am able to recognize it and understand it and try to repair any of those moments. Whereas, unfortunately, in previous generations, they didn't have that capacity to do that. And so I feel now, because of that, with me trying to break that generational trauma that happened, and there's so many people I've talked to, especially those who see the show, who relate to that and say, like, we're the generation that's trying so hard to just break that pattern of like not talking to our children, and or being angry or being this and that, these things that we dealt with, with our parents or our grandparents and so on, that we're trying to stop. And so I feel like by having done this show, it has been therapeutic throughout the entire process of creating it over the years, but then continuing to do it up on its feet and being reminded of that. And I feel like it's helped I know, like, my sister, and it's helped my wife, and I know that it's helped other people. As I mentioned, so many people afterwards have mentioned that, and I feel like there's this healing that is happening on a deeper level, because like I understand it, because like, my father, he passed away at the end of January this year, and he never got a chance to see the show, unfortunately. I was kind of scared of him to see the show. Like, he was aware that the show was happening. He was aware that I've been working on it. I told him the kind of gist of it, but I was always afraid that he would come and see it, and he would be upset about it, even though at the end of the day, it's a love letter to him, and it shows the depth of who he was, because it starts out all the way through seeing it through the eyes of a child. And so, for the longest portion of the show, he's, quote unquote, the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I get older and I realize like, oh, he's not a bad guy. He just had all these other things that he didn't know how to deal with. And so I was always afraid of him seeing it, because I didn't want him to get emotional, because I knew that he didn't have that emotional base to be okay with it. And even though I know that he would have appreciated it and loved it, and he was able to get to a point later in his life where all those elements of not being able to cry, don't cry, be strong, all that stuff, that started to crackle and weaken as he got older, and so he would cry more easily, and he was starting to say, I love you. It was still hard for him, but he would do it in his own way that I appreciate it. But I feel like now, especially getting to do it again with him on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm going to have this level of emotion to it, and that's going to be so different, because I'll feel like he will get to see it in like the best way possible, because he'll, I'll be like, hey, do it Robin doesn't, come on through me, man, like,
Yeah.
like, let's
Yeah.
do this, to just kind of show him that, like, hey, I still love you, and I have loved you, and I know that you love me too, and like, I'm just looking forward to sharing that love with audiences so that they can hopefully.
And that's the gift in this, is that I truly in my soul believe your dad will be there. He'll be a part of it, and he'll be able to do it without the filters or limitations of what his life was like when he was here. And I've
Yeah,
done a lot of thought in writing and processing about family of origin stuff and ancestors and lineage and
yeah,
breaking ancestral patterns. And it really, some different circumstances came up, and I realized that they just did not have the social or the cultural supports in place to
hmm,
be able to deal with it. And then you look at historical references that were happening during that time, and it
yeah,
got passed down and passed down and passed down. But what I'm finding is there's a multitude of people on the planet right now. They're coming in for a family, and they're saying, I'll do it. I'll do the heavy lifting. I'll be the one
hmm,
that will shift this.
yeah,
And your children will never experience this.
yeah,
And that gives me just goosebumps from head to toe, because
yeah,
you did it. Everything else you do in the world is gravy, but it also, it's personal aside, I think that it allows us to see what happened to us with from a place of compassion
Hmm.
rather than a place of blame or hurt or misunderstanding. And
Yes.
that's healing for our people in spirit as well as for us.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would always say that doing the show feels like I was kind of being the sacrificial lamb to show that, like, hey, here is somebody who has a reputation and is being known as like, oh, nice guy Dave. He's always so nice. He's
Mhm.
so sweet. He's so fun. He's so happy. He's so positive, and to show that vulnerability of like being like, hey, I'm going to show you that. No, especially once I had a child and I started to go through being a father and all the idiosyncrasies of having to deal with that and kind of recalibrating your brain to be like, what am I happening here? And then having the moments, where I was being like my dad and like, losing my shit, excuse me for saying,
Mhm.
but
Oh, that's okay.
but like, and just like going off the handle and then you're having that moment. I mean, the one specific moment that happened for me, and this was even like the big catalyst for the story, was having the moment where I yelled at my son because I was so worked up and I just like blurted out and I yelled at him. I don't even remember I yelled at him, but it was the first time that I yelled at him and he was young. And I made him cry, and
Mhm.
I immediately was like this like M. Night Shyamalan moment, where where I was like sucked back and having all these memories of my dad, and it became this thing. I was like, oh my gosh, I just did what my dad did, and I, instead of doing what my dad would have done, which was just like continue to yell and like go away and slam the door and then not talk about it, and his way of making up for it was to just like get you pizza later or buy a toy but never bring it up. Was that I immediately went in and just felt this urge to just hug him and was like, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. That was not nice, Daddy. You didn't mean to. And just realized like, whoa, gotta bring it down. And and so like that was the thing of like being confident enough to be like, and I mean, I was scared to reveal that, if you will. But now I'm not, because I realize, oh, there are so many people, like that's everybody. You know what I mean? Like we've all had those moments where we just like lost our cool, and the difference now is trying to do the repair, do the work to like change that. And because I always found it so interesting, especially with talking to you and hearing your stories and the things that you would talk about, from the standpoint of understanding that, oh wow, it does heal. The ancestral healing, like you're like, oh wow, that is a thing. Like that's kind of amazing. Like that you think that you're like, oh, I'm doing this to also help the souls in the past. Like yeah, and that's something that's I just think that's beautiful, and I never really made that connection before until probably like a couple years ago, that was a thing as well. That you're like, well, it's not just about the people going forward, it's the people going back too, of being like, oh, thank you for fixing that, thank you. Because we're all connected here and we're all probably coming back multiple times, and maybe, so it's like, let's just make it better for round seven. So maybe we don't
And
have to keep coming back here and doing it over and over and over again.
and so a lot of our listeners are very empathic, obviously, very
Hmm.
sensitive people, and they feel like they were airdropped into a family and
Yeah.
not understood, or there was a harshness, or there was physical, mental, spiritual abuse, whatever it might have been. I don't think there's an accident to that. I really
Hmm.
think in order for this shift in humanity that that is happening right now, you have to come in and experience that with your dad in order to, I don't know if there's any validity to this or not, but if there are reincarnation, and I do believe there is multiple lifetimes,
Hmm.
or is the work you're doing meaning that your ancestors can come in and not have to deal with that? Like they're
Yeah.
saying, thank you. We don't have to come back and fight through those
Yeah.
emotions of not being able to express ourselves. And
Yeah.
I think that this is really important as well, is that you're, I hope this comes out right.
Sure.
You're sharing an honest portrayal of masculinity and being a man that is
Yes.
often not voiced in a way
Yes.
that's positive.
Hmm.
And I have sons, and they're adult men, and they're good men. They're kind, they're thoughtful, they're good men. And I know good is subjective, but
Right.
they'll express themselves. They're
Yeah.
kind, they'll help people. And I think that we need to focus on that's what you're doing. That's what you're
Yeah.
doing is you're letting people know that you can be a male, married, have children, be a dad, and still come from a place of compassion and empathy and caring and wanting to make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. 1,000%. I mean that was always like a big thing. I've always been, I've mentioned the story like being called like a crybaby. My dad would like
Hmm.
jokingly be like, "Oh, a crybaby. And I was a crybaby. Oh, I was a crybaby." And then later on in life learning that my dad was a crybaby. So it was almost like this thing where, he was like seeing himself in me and was just like, "Oh, stop crying. Don't do what I do because that's not what's supposed to happen because my dad said not to do that." But it was just like I can't control it. Like it's just there's times I'm just like and not just because something bad happened, but like, seeing something beautiful happen. And I mean that's why I was always drawn towards the art world. Going to movies and going to things and having that and wanting to hear people's stories because I wanted that outlet to be there. And yeah, I do think that that is a big thing, especially now. I'm seeing so much of it, especially because of things dealing with mental health in general, being so talked about and being so open that I think that aspect connecting to the idea of changing the way masculinity is considered, that it's like, no, one of the things I say in the show is that Robin says to me is about you showing your emotions that is making you strong. Like you are a strong person if you can do that. And it just goes to show that like, gosh, you need to get it out first of all. And I am not afraid to show my kids me cry. Like they see me cry all the time, and I want them to see me cry. And like, yes, you got to also be like strong enough to be there for them, so they're not always having to take care of you, because that's a whole other thing. You get you don't want to go down that avenue where it's like, but like you need to show that like yeah, no, like get it out. Let's just cry, just because if not, then it is going to come out exactly how it did with my dad, which was like screaming and yelling and kicking doors and which is terrifying as a child. It's like if he had that permission to know that like it's okay to cry, you're allowed to cry. The first time I saw my dad cry was when I went to college, and we were setting up my dorm room, and the other family that I was with, my roommate's family was there, and they pointed out like, hey, you should go to your dad. And I was like, okay. And I went over to him, and I saw that he was like crying. My immediate reaction with seeing him crying was I thought he was having a heart attack.
Hmm.
I was, because I've never seen it before. I was like, are you okay? What's the matter? And he just turned to me and he started crying and said, I'm just going to miss you so much. And then of course I started bawling and we hugging, and it was like this first time where we connected in this deep way. And I was like, oh my God, I'm 17 now. Like it took 17 years for this. Like, like, come on. But I'm glad that it even happened at all. Some people don't get that at all. And I do find it interesting that this is a time frame where I'm seeing so much of that openness and talking about it. And I think a lot of it is because of social media and people starting to say and realizing like, oh, this is okay. Oh, this is okay. I can. You sure? And so that's not going to change the way you look at me and perceive me. Like, no. You're still a strong person. It's okay. Good. You can still be a man and cry. And it's
Yes. And
please do.
it's being a human being. It's
That's
having
exactly right.
and being in
Yeah.
touch with that. And I can remember my sons were always comfortable crying, showing their emotions. And then I remember when it stopped because of
Mm,
societal pressures from school, from
yes.
other kids, from peer pressure, from boys don't fill in the blank.
Right.
And I think that they're on that cusp generation, but these kids coming in now won't have those same restraints in place with expressing themselves. So,
Mm-hmm.
kind of jumping back to what you said a minute ago about mental health and more awareness, I read this the other day and it really stuck with me. And it said, the opposite of depression is not finding happiness, it's allowing yourself to really flourish with your creativity. And do you feel
Mm-hmm.
that when people are able to use their creativity, that it may help alleviate um, depression, anxiety, fear of expressing themselves?
Oh yes, 1,000%. And and I think that's also one of the things that does become that I'm learning does become a balance with having young children. I have a 6-year-old and a soon-to-be 10-year-old, is that if I don't have the time to be creative, work on a script, be in a show, have those moments, then I find myself being really on edge, and I get really, you realize like, oh, that is an outlet. That's for some people they play golf, some people they go bowling, or they go,
Mhm.
or people draw, but for me it's like, I have to have that creativity, because it is such this massive release in so many ways. Like it fills you up. It's like it's a cup that needs to be filled up, and if it's not, that's when it's like, okay, well, this thing, it's gonna break soon, so we need to do something here. um but yes, I think that's a huge thing. In fact, I was actually just talking to my wife again about the Elizabeth Gilbert book. It's called Big Magic,
Oh, I love that
and
book.
it's such a
Yes.
great book. And I just kind of read it on a whim. I think I actually got it for her, and then I was like, well, you're not reading it, because she was reading a million other books at the same time. I was like, oh, I'll read it. And I remember reading it like right on the cusp of the pandemic, so it was terrible time for everybody, and like you're just kind of like, what am I doing with my life now,
Hmm.
and reading that was such an amazing it was a revelation in a sense, because all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's right, oh, I see how this is, and how this does like fill you up in a way that you just got to keep doing it, like for me personally, like I know there's nothing else that I can do or want to do, and when you have those moments where you're kind of like, oh, I'm just going to give up. It's so hard, which it is. It's a very hard business. But you'd be like, well, what else would I do? And you're like, nothing. Like, I couldn't do anything else. Like, I mean, I could, but I would be miserable,
Right.
uh, and it's because it's like, for at least me personally, I feel like, oh, I was brought here to do this, and it's like my wife Chelsea and I, we just went and saw Rufus Wainwright, the musician, the singer, last week, and it was this like beautiful experience, because you looked at this guy, he's up there, he's performing, and he's got this incredible voice that's so unique, and you just were like, this guy, like he was here to do this, and when you see that, it's just a reminder of like the beauty of everybody, not just in the arts, but anyway, some people are amazing at being CEOs and companies, and doing finances. You're like, oh,
Right.
you're saving the world with your finances. Thank you for I'm so glad you had that part of your brain, because I don't, but I will entertain you.
But
Uh,
but another piece to that, Dave, is that by you stepping into what you really resonates, what you came here to do with sharing your light with other people, you're
yeah.
gifting your children with the freedom and the autonomy to say, wow, I should follow my heart and do
Yes.
what I came here to do. And the people in your audience who are entertained, and you're giving them respite from a world that's kind of upside down right now. But
Hmm.
I think that's another part of breaking this, is encouraging people to be who they came here to be, not who we think they're supposed to be.
Yes, exactly. And right now, with having two young children, like it really feels like this is the time where we're getting to kind of see that in real time happening. The dabbling with a little bit of everything. My son's really into Taylor Swift right now. I'm like, go there, yeah,
Yeah.
and so he wants to like create the music and use my recording stuff so he can make his own, quote unquote Taylor Swift album. But
Yeah.
then at the same time, then like recently he's just got hooked on like baseball, and I'm like, great, let's do baseball. Let's see what that's like,
Mhm.
and then at one point he was like obsessed with like building things and wanting to know how things are put together, and you're like, okay, yeah, maybe he's gonna be an architect. But
Yeah.
it was just it's so fun to kind of be at that point where you're seeing that, and you're like, oh, this is where you're trying to find like, what am I here for? What is that? When I was just going through my parents' house, because once my father passed away, my mother has Alzheimer's, and unfortunately, we had to put her in a nursing home because we couldn't keep the place anymore. And so we were going through like decades of stuff, and I came across all of these pieces of art that I did as a child, and it was so fascinating. I had like books upon books of drawings and stories that I would create, and it was that realization that started to kick in as I was seeing this. I was like, oh, I don't know how to tell stories yet through like writing them. It's through making the imagery, and I was just like, wow, I was obsessed, like with just drawing and making, and then writing stories, and then coming up with like fake movie scenarios, and just seeing that I was basically seeing the evolution of what I do now, and being like, oh, I was like 5 years old for some of these things, and you're like, okay, yeah, I came here for that." Like,
Yeah.
and now I'm doing it, and I'm loving it and enjoying it, and yeah. So
And,
yeah,
and what's really, really cool from that starting point, that it's always been part of who you are, of wanting to entertain. You mentioned that you have the genetic connection with your grandfather and the clown and the
hmm
entertainer. You're allowed all these things coming together, but it also continues to grow and evolve as you continue to grow and evolve.
yeah,
And I know that one of the things we had chatted about previously was that and your wife Chelsea is amazing. She is a
yeah.
ray of light in her own. I want to give her a plug because
hmm
we'll add in how to contact Chelsea for her work because she's
Yeah.
amazing. Is that wanting to move forward with eventually having a production company
Yes.
or something that would, could you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, my wife Chelsea Shannon is just, incredible, and I'm not just saying that because, I'm wearing a ring that makes me have to say so. So, and she's hearing this, and she loves this podcast, and I'll get in big trouble. No, but she's somebody who she started out as a performer, and then after a point, she decided, oh, I actually don't want to be a performer because there's this whole other side of her. Like she's just extremely smart, and so she then switched over to trying dabbling, being like, oh, maybe I'll try directing. And so she was doing on that. And then it switched over to then she started her whole company of a festival. It was the New York Children's Theater Festival. And she ran it for 5 or 6 years. And she was like, I'm just going to run a festival now. And so then she like learned how everything worked on the other side. And she did all these presentations for all these shows that came in. And then she and then she went from there, and she was working part-time as at an accountant's office because her accountant that she had for her festival needed extra work, and was like, I'd love for you to like hire you to come in because I just trust you. And she's like, okay. And so then by doing that, she learned about all of like the business aspect of how taxes work, and LLCs and companies. And then she produced, prior to that, she produced a show of mine that I did, the Walken On Sunshine thing that was at the Fringe Festival. And that thing would have fell apart if she was not at the helm,
Mhm.
because she knew exactly when to like, okay, having run the festival, exactly when to start, raising money, exactly when do we do this. And then now, in addition to that, she also she teaches, not teaches, she does Reiki, and she's also now a consultant. She consults with artists, on how to make themselves feel more confident as an artist, because we all go through these phases where we're like, oh no, I'm at a standstill. And she's just fantastic at finding the things to get them motivated to be like, no, you're going to do this, try this, maybe do this, and give them what they need for that next step. And as we've been going through our process of all this, as she's been working on that side of things, and I've been working on discovering what kind of a storyteller I am, and starting to put the pieces together, that I'm like, oh, all of my stories have like a consistent theme. There's empathy and compassion behind it, of showing, particularly in a family setting, of that idea of like, oh, if this didn't happen several generations ago, then the synchronicity of it wouldn't have affected how my generation is, and so on and so forth. And that mixed in with like the mental health aspect, dealing with like Alzheimer's, and dealing with like anxiety and things of that nature, and overcoming it. That we started to see that there's like our paths have started to kind of connect in a way where it's like, oh, we can do this together. I have new shows that I am writing, and have even written, hoping to do again beyond just readings, that we're basically going to, sooner than later, start a production company where we really are focused on the theater that deals with healing, and deals with that idea of compassion, and that you start to realize, you're like, oh, of being of service, as is always said, and
Right.
realizing like, oh, this is the kind of theater that we enjoy, and this is the kind of theater that's enjoyable to do. And it helps you really hone in on why you're telling the story. You're like, okay, so why am I the right person to be telling the story, which is something that is always brought up. And so then you start to recognize, like right now, I'm writing a play that's dealing with dissociative identity disorder. I don't have DID. I'm not a therapist. But I started to find the twist about it, and how how there's a similarity between IFS, internal family systems, and that's something we all deal with, like the different parts of ourselves. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, it's once again the same thing as like the Robin thing, where it's like Robin is the catalyst and the kind of, thing to get you into the world. The idea is the thing to get you into the world of what I'm ultimately trying to tell about, and have that universal aspect of like, oh yeah, we all have different sides of ourselves that we, struggle with. And Robin, it's like, oh yeah, we all have generational trauma and we're trying not to be like our parents, and
Yeah.
and finding that like there's a consistency in theme. And so we're both very excited to bring our powers together like a Voltron from the 1980s cartoons for anyone who so yeah.
But it aligns beautifully with so many people right now are feeling this magnetic pull. I know I came for something more. I know I came for something bigger. I came to help. And
Mhm.
for you and your wife to connect and have such a shared vision, there's a beautiful reciprocity with what you're both bringing to the table that is
Mhm.
going to build this. So how can people find her for her work if they're a creative or an artist? What would her website be or her connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So for her, it's chelseashannon.com, and it's Chelsea is Chelseey versus an A, and then Shannon SHANNON.com. And on there, she has all of the information about the type of work she does between the Reiki and as well as the creative care that she does with artists and consulting them to help them find the motivation and what they need to move forward and get out of that rut. And we had a brief, LLC when we did the Walken On Sunshine thing, but now we're wanting to like be come together to create our own production company. And that's like another example where it's like, we've been together since 2003, so 21 years we've been together. I think this month actually. And and it becomes one of those things where you realize, it's like that idea when you said like dropping in, you dropped in to do something. And I feel like she dropped into my life and I dropped into her life at the correct time where it was like, oh, we always talk about how like, oh, we're so lucky that we found each other so early and we didn't have to go through too many of those
Hmm.
relationships to decide like, what kind of person am I supposed to be with,
Yeah.
and then to simultaneously see how our paths have evolved to then come to this point where we're like, oh, we're both on the same page. We've been on the same page this whole time. And so, you know what? Hey, let's make a book together, shall we? Like let's put those pages together.
So
So yeah,
you do have upcoming shows as well. And
I
and that's
do.
another thing. If anyone is in proximity of being able to see Dave do his show, buy a ticket, go have a weekend away, go and do this because it will be amazing. So could you share what's coming up?
Yeah, sure. So in October 9th through the 27th, I'm going to be doing Robin and Me at in the outskirts of Philadelphia at Hedgerow Theater. So you can go to hedgerowtheater.org to get tickets. It's a 3-week run. I'm super excited about it because it's from in my hometown where I grew up. So all of these stories that have taken place take place in that vicinity. And also the woman who runs the company, her name is Marcy Bermusi. I grew up with her. We've known each other since we were kids. So it's another example of like how amazing is it that she's now the artistic director of this company and able to bring me in to do the show. And then come January, the last week of January, I believe it's January 22nd through the 25th, at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which is connected to my old alma mater, Point Park University. They're going to be doing a 1-week run, 5 performances. And that's another example of, of being like, wow, also a majority of these stories came during my time while I was there. So it's been very exciting to know that, like, hey, getting to do this show again will be at the place where these stories came from, and I'll have a lot of support with family and friends. But I'm looking forward to others getting to see it who are, there in both sides of Pennsylvania or anywhere on the outskirts who would be
Yes.
wanting to come check it out. And that one, I believe, is like playhouse.pointpark.edu. You have to Google that one. I
Mhm.
think those things always get the long
Right.
.org.edu .this .dot. And you're like, ellipses? Okay.
But I can feel it in my heart of going back to where it all started and being able to
Yeah.
share that and being able to honor who you were and who your family continues to be
Yeah.
through your art. That's an amazing, amazing gift.
Yeah.
Amazing gift.
Thank you. It
Um,
feels good. I'm excited about that. I feel
so
fortunate.
you did such a beautiful job promoting your wife, her business, what you're going to do together. Where can
Mhm.
people find out more about you, Dave?
So, I have a similar basic website, just my name, Dave Droxler, DROXLER.com. And I have everything up there. And then, of course, on the good old social medias of like Instagram, once again, it's just a simple Dave Droxler because there's not many people have my name apparently, which I'm grateful for. And the same with on Facebook, I'm on there as well. So I'm always using both of those sites to post about projects I'm working on, even outside of the Robin show. So yeah, those would definitely be the places to keep me in your world.
Well, thank you so very much because I know that there are people who are trying to figure out how do I follow this inner calling that I'm having to perform or act or draw or paint or teach or fill in the blank. It doesn't matter what it
Yeah,
is. And you can feel your passion and conviction for what you do in a way that is very service based. So thank you so much.
thank
And
you. That means a lot. Thank you so much. I
well,
really appreciate that.
it emanates from you. You can feel it. And
Oh, thanks.
yes, I can see why, you've aligned with the Robin in me and all this stuff, but it's a thread throughout all of your work. It's about compassion and heart and kindness and
Yeah,
helping other human beings.
yeah.
So for anyone who's listening, how I feel about these episodes is that there is something that you came to do to make a difference, to raise your vibration and help someone else raise theirs. So it doesn't matter how small it is or how big it is, but please shine your light and share that with each other.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. I really do. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. And again, it's davedroxler.com if you're in the Philly or Pittsburgh area. All this will be in the show notes, but thank you, Dave. This has been
Thank
amazing.
you. We have a good one. Take care, everybody out there. Bye.